Ashley, thank you so much, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you this evening. And like you said, I'd much rather be there in person, but hopefully in the not too distant future we can get back to meeting together, because it always fascinates me to meet with agritourism professionals and see really firsthand what's going on and what they're involved with. As Ashley said, my name is Scott DeNoon. I'm the Farm Product and Underwriting Manager for the Virginia Farm Bureau Insurance Companies. I have about 30 years of experience working with farmers, helping them tailor insurance coverages to their operation. And really the last 15 years, 10 to 15 years, I've really concentrated on agritourism operations. I have a passion for agritourism operators and what goes on and the diversification that takes place. So what I want to talk about tonight is give you a real high level view of liability insurance and agritourism. And the University of Vermont just recently completed a study that they surveyed almost 1,900 agritourism operators from across the United States from a period of from November of 2019 until February of 2020. So it was pre-COVID. And what they found is 80% of those responders indicated that they had serious concerns about their liability insurance program. They had serious concerns about the liability that they were exposed to as a result of their particular operation. So as I said, I'm going to give you some really high level information tonight, not only about liability insurance, but also talk about some safety things that you can do as an agritourism operator. I'm guessing since most of you are involved with pumpkins and you probably have maybe have a U-pick operation of some type. I kind of give you just some tips from a safety standpoint that you can do to help with your own particular operation. And during the course of our presentation tonight, I may say something that you may say, wait a minute, Scott, I talked with my insurance agent and my insurance agent told me something completely different. And if that's the case, trust your insurance agent, because your insurance agent is going to know your operation a whole lot better and hopefully have a more in-depth knowledge of your operation than I am. So that being said, let's get started. And I want to start with just the basics. What is liability insurance? And essentially what liability insurance is it's a risk transfer mechanism. You, as the customer, pay a premium to the insurance company. And essentially what you're doing is you're transferring the risk of the activities that you're involved with the liability associated with those activities. You're transferring that to an insurance company whose duty, based on the contract verbiage, is to protect you in the event your activities cause harm to another individual. And in addition to paying any damages that may result out of that, the liability insurance policy will also cover any legal fees that are associated with that from a defense cost standpoint. Really, to have liability, you have to have four things. You have to have a duty of care. And as an agritourism professional, especially if you are inviting people, inviting customers, inviting the public to come onto your farm to pick pumpkins, for a hayride, for a fall festival, for a farm to table dinner, anything like that, they are considered, the public, those customers are considered to be legally business invitees. And by law, you as the individual who is asking them to come onto your premises owe them the highest degree of care. So with liability, you owe them a duty of care to create a safe as of an experience as possible. The second thing you have to have is you have to have a breach of that duty. In other words, something must go wrong to have caused the third element of liability, damages. And when I think about pick your own operations, and I'm just going to throw out a couple things, maybe a piece of equipment. Maybe a piece of equipment is being operated at the time the customers are on the premises, and that piece of equipment causes injury to one of those customers. Or maybe there is a an accumulation of containers, picking containers, and one of the customers trips over those containers and injures themselves, that would be damages. And finally, in order to have liability, you have to have causation. And what causation means is the damages were caused by that breach of duty of care, and that's defined as you see on the slide there, as negligence. And in order to have liability, in order for you to be liable for damages or injury or to someone else, a third party, you have to be proved there has to be negligence on your part. So keep that in mind as we go through that, because negligence and the definition and the elements of liability are really important when you get into talking about your farm liability insurance. The farm liability policy, and I'm going to talk about just the base policy, and then I'm going to tell you some areas to be concerned about if you just have a basic base policy, and some questions, and there'll be a slide in here that will have some questions that I strongly recommend that you ask your insurance provider about. But what makes up the base liability policy from a farm perspective? There's premises and operations coverage, there's product liability coverage, which is a major concern now and has been a concern now for probably the last 8 to 10 years. There's medical payments coverage. And lastly, which I think is an overlooked, probably one of the most overlooked coverages in the liability insurance policy, is the claims and defense cost coverage. So when I say premises and operations liability, that's basically bodily injury or property damage caused by an event or an occurrence that arising out of the ownership or maintenance or use of your farm or your insured premises. And the simplest example I can give you of that, if you have a neighbor come over and visit your farm and they trip over a tool, or again, they're injured by a piece of equipment, that's where premises and operations liability coverage comes into play. From a pumpkin grower standpoint, again, it goes back to that example I used a few minutes ago. You may have an accumulation of containers, and one of the customers trips over those containers. That's where premises and operations liability coverage would come into play. I'm going to spend a little time on product liability, because as I said just a second ago, this is an area of liability insurance that has become huge. And for agritourism operators, it is a major concern. What product liability coverage is, it's your legal liability, the insurance legal liability for bodily injury or property damage caused by your defective products. And when we talk about agritourism, it can be raw produce, it can be a value-added product such as baked goods, it can be meat, it can be third-party goods that are purchased from a third party and you resell them. And we'll talk about why it's important to make sure that you have the proper coverage in place to protect you for the product liability associated with third-party goods. One thing to remember about product liability, most policies, most if not all, contain an exclusion, and I'm talking about the base policy now. Most, if not all, contain an exclusion for processed or manufactured products. That means if that raw product, and since we're talking about pumpkins, I'm going to say, let's say that you in your operation, of course, you sell raw pumpkins, but you also say, you know what, it'd be nice to start selling pumpkin jelly or pumpkin candy or pumpkin pies. If you have a basic farm liability policy, you should be okay product liability wise for that raw product, for that raw pumpkin. But once you change that pumpkin in any way, whether you make it into pie, jelly, candy, whatever, the base coverage that is provided, the product liability coverage that is provided under the base farm liability policy is null and void. And I've had an attorney tell me before, altering that product can be something as simple as just, if we were talking about apples, it can be something as simple as slicing an apple. So it's real important that one of the questions that you want to ask your insurance provider is, what type of product liability coverage do I have? Do I have coverage for my raw products? Or do I have coverage for processed products? Find that out. As I said, most policies will give you coverage for the raw product, but where concerns and where I've seen issues arise over the years is when operators may start out just selling raw product and then decide, well, let's start selling pies or baked goods or something like that. And in that particular case, what needs to happen, most carriers, and the company I work for does this, we will attach a rider to the policy for an additional premium that will provide product liability coverage for those those processed products rather. So again, really important to find out from a product liability perspective what products are covered under your current policy. Why product liability is so tricky is several reasons. I've only listed a few of them here. With a product liability lawsuit, either the user of the product or anyone affected by the use of that product may file a product liability lawsuit. Another thing unique about product liability is that it attaches to every enterprise in the supply chain. And I can't tell you how many times over the years, I've worked with agritourism operators who say, well, I'm only worried about my product liability. Although I'm selling product of my neighbor down the street, they've got their own product liability protection. So I don't have to worry about protecting myself for their product liability. That's not necessarily true, because with a product liability suit, if you sold the product, even though you may not have produced it, grown it, whatever, you're still going to be named as a party in a lawsuit, because as I said, it follows every enterprise in that supply chain. So even though you may be selling third-party product, you still have a product liability exposure. And again, if you're processing or packaging products for direct sale to the public, that definitely increases your exposure from a product liability standpoint. In Virginia, Virginia does not impose strict liability. What I mean by strict liability is there are certain activities that, well, let me back up. What strict liability is it doesn't make a difference if you are negligent or not. If someone is injured, someone gets sick as a result of your defective product, if strict liability was imposed, I said something about negligence a little bit ago. When it comes to strict liability, negligence doesn't come into play. It's basically if you're selling product and a product liability suit is filed, you are liable whether you are negligent or not. Fortunately, in Virginia, it's not like that. In Virginia, negligence is the grounds for liability. So in Virginia, in order to be proven liable, it has to be proven that you were negligent and that you did something wrong that caused damages to a third party. Some more concerns about product liability. Number of claims and lawsuits as a result of product liability has grown significantly in recent years. The size of the awards that injured parties have received. And I'm not talking just about agritourism operators here. I'm talking about product liability as a whole. But the size of the awards has increased as well. And as I talked about a little bit ago, if you're selling product directly to the public, that increases your exposure from a product liability perspective. So that's something that insurance companies are concerned with. And unfortunately, I don't think it's getting any better because of the society that we live in. I'm not telling you guys anything you don't already know. We live in a society where It's commonplace for lawsuits to be filed. And the next time you sit down after dinner one night at prime time between like 7 and 9 o'clock, just count the number of personal injury attorney commercials that you see on TV, and that'll tell you something about our society today as far as the legal aspect and lawsuits go. Another thing to be aware of, and this is where UPIC operations really need to be aware and ask the right questions. There is an exclusion, and I call it the business exclusion, in the base farm liability policy that says coverage does not apply bodily injury or property damage resulting from the activities of a business. Now, for the farm policy, even though we know farming is a business, even though we know it's a business, for the farm policy, business is defined as any trade or profession or occupation, whether full or part-time, other than farming. So as far as the farm policy goes, the way the definition is written in the contract, farming is not considered a business. Farming is considered to be farming. Here's where you need to pay attention. And another question for your insurance provider: how does your policy define farming? In most cases, most but not all, farming is going to be defined as the production of crops, right? That's farming. The raising or care of livestock, that's farming. And this third bullet point, this may or may not be in all contracts, but for some policies, farming is also considered to be the operation of roadside stands and farmers markets maintained principally for the sale of your own product. That's considered to be farming, and that's covered by under the base policy. It's covered whether it be premises and operations liability or product liability. But again, this definition is not in all contracts. Here's where you need to be concerned if you are operating a UPIC operation, is where I'll pick up, but does not include other retail activities. Well, guess what? UPIC operations are considered to fall into that category of other retail activities, along with, and this is not an all-inclusive list, okay? These are just some activities that are excluded that fall into that other retail activity basket. And you see pick your own operations, you see event venues, fall festivals, hay rides, hay mazes, gift shops, camping, things like that. That falls outside of that definition of farming. So it's really important that you find out, how does my policy define farming? Now the question you may be, well, if my UPIC operation is not considered to be farming, how do I get coverage for it? Most cases, you can buy a rider, just like I talked about for product liability. You can buy a rider that will provide you with liability coverage for the particular activity that you are involved in, whether it be UPIC, whether it be hay rides, whether it be wedding venues, things all along those lines. But the key is find out, how does my policy define farming? And I can't emphasize this enough either, this next point. Make sure that your agent is aware of what you're doing. And if you start out saying, well, I'm just going to have a pick your own pumpkin patch, and that's all I'm going to do, and then you decide to add hay rides, you decide to have a fall festival, you decide to have a farm to table dinner, every time that you add or think about adding an activity to your operation, make sure your agent knows about what's going on, because you don't want to take that chance. Unfortunately, I've seen it happen a few times where operations start out very small and then they diversify and add activities, and something may happen. And I had one situation where it started out as a UPIC strawberry operation, and then they decided to start selling strawberry ice cream. They didn't tell their agent, and something happened as a result of that, as a result of the ice cream sales. Fortunately, it wasn't catastrophic, but they had no coverage for it. And the operator at the time that the loss occurred made the following statement: "I meant to call you." This operator made the comment to their agent, "I meant to call you." Well, unfortunately, at that point in the game, it's too late to call them. So make sure that your agent is aware of all activities that are going on. And I strongly recommend that you have your agent come out and have them walk your operation, have them walk your farm. They are, in most cases, they'll be able to provide you with some information to hopefully make your operation safer. And that's part of the premium that's part of why you pay your premium, is for their expertise. And like I tell our Farm Bureau agents, and I tell our Farm Bureau clients, make your agent earn their money. So it's nothing wrong with asking them to come out once a year and take a walk around. So, questions: how does my policy define farming? Do my agritourism fall within that definition? Do my agritourism activities fall within a definition of farming? And does my policy provide coverage for my products, both raw and processed? Another important part of the farm liability coverage is medical payments coverage. And I call medical payments coverage goodwill coverage. If you pull out your policy, you're going to see a separate limit. Usually it's $5,000 per person or something, or $1,000 per person. And I call medical payments coverage goodwill coverage because it's paid without regard to fault. And it's what it says it is. It provides coverage for third-party medical expenses. And the reason I call it goodwill coverage is because, like I said, it's paid without regard to fault. But if I come to your pick your own operation and I trip over those containers and I break my ankle and I incur medical bills of about $2,000-$3,000, if your insurance company responds and pays those medical bills, chances of me filing a lawsuit against you if my bills are paid are greatly reduced. So that's why we call it goodwill coverage. Is you don't have to worry about proven fault or negligence or anything like that. And again, it's usually limited. Most medical payments limits go up to about $5,000 per person. So, and the incidental coverage, which I said earlier, I believe is the most valuable and overlooked part of liability insurance, is claims and defense cost coverage. And it is what it says it is. It pays all legal costs associated with a lawsuit that occurs as a result of an activity that is covered by your policy. And that's the key. For defense cost coverage to apply, the claim must be covered by the policy. Let's go back to product liability just a second. Let's say that you start selling pumpkins, and then all of a sudden you say, you know what, we're going to start selling pumpkin pie. And a third-party customer comes by one afternoon, buys a pumpkin pie, goes home, and says, man, I don't feel so well, and ends up having to go to the hospital or whatever. And they start asking questions. Well, what happened? Well, I ate that pumpkin pie. That pumpkin pie probably had something to do with it. And they come back to you and they say, hey, I got sick as a result of your pumpkin pie. I was in the hospital. I want you to pay my medical bills. I want you to pay my lost wages. I was out of work, whatever. Well, hopefully you have let your agent know that you started selling pumpkin pie. Otherwise, and you've got product liability coverage to protect you, because if you don't, defense costs, you have no defense cost coverage, because that loss, that claim associated with that pumpkin pie, that quote unquote defective pumpkin pie, won't be covered because the policy wasn't properly endorsed to provide product liability coverage. So again, defense cost is a very, very valuable part of the liability insurance policy. But the key is making sure that every activity goes back to making sure every activity is disclosed to your agent and to your insurance company. Some other liability insurance considerations that I threw in here, workers' compensation coverage. In Virginia, workers' compensation coverage is required for all employers, including farms who regularly employ 2 or more full or part-time employees. That rule changed here in the last probably 5 years. There used to be an exception for horticultural or agricultural operations. Instead of more than 2, it used to be more than 3, but unfortunately that changed here probably about 5 years ago. And from a liability perspective, umbrella coverage. Umbrella coverage is it is essentially excess liability coverage. Under your base farm policy, you may have, let's say, a $1 million liability limit, but you say, you know what, I want $3 million. And maybe the company doesn't write $3 million worth of liability, a $3 million limit under their base policy. You can buy an umbrella policy that essentially does what an umbrella does. It sits over that base policy. And once that $1 million, if something happens and that $1 million limit of that base policy is exhausted, then the umbrella coverage can come into play. So I recommend umbrella coverage for any agritourism operator that's inviting the public on the premises. I also recommend, people ask me all the time, well, what liability limit do you recommend under my base policy? If you can get, and my answer is as much as you can get. In this day and age, I don't think you can have too much liability, and believe it or not, it's pretty affordable considering, and an umbrella policy is too, considering the coverage that you get. But when people ask me a minimum limit for a base policy, I recommend at a minimum $1 million if you're inviting the public to come onto your property. There's some things you can do from a safety perspective to protect your operation, and I try to tailor these as much as possible to you pick operation. Make sure that your entrance and exits are clearly marked, that they're unobstructed from a visibility perspective. Make sure that your parking area, I'm going to talk about parking in just a second, but that your driveway, your roadway is level, that it's free of potholes, any type of obstructions. Again, your parking area, make sure it's of adequate size. Make sure you've got signs showing people where to park and directing them where to park. Again, make sure that it's free of potholes or obstructions. If you operate during the nighttime hours, make sure you have proper lighting. And in the winter months, if this is more for like Christmas tree operations, make sure that you have a plan for the prompt removal of ice and snow. Just some general things to be aware of. Make sure your walkways are clear and unobstructed. Signs. I can't say enough about signs. You can never have too much signs or too many signs. Make sure people know where to go. Make sure that, and I'm going to talk about the Virginia Agritourism liability sign here in just a second. But if you have areas where you do not want the public to go, you don't want the customers in a particular area, put up a sign, employees only, keep out, something along those lines that clearly shows you do not want them there. Is it going to stop them from going there? No. But if something happens and they do get hurt or injured or something bad occurs, you have done your due diligence by putting up a sign that says, hey, I told them not to go there. Same thing with any potentially hazardous areas that you may have on your property, whether it be, and when I think about this, I think about ponds or lakes, or if it's a dairy farm and you have dairy and you have farm tours, your manure storage facilities, make sure you put up some type of fencing, some type of barricade to keep the public out of those particular areas. Another thing, farm machinery. a lot of cases, people look at farms, people that visit UPIC operations, people that come to farms for farm to table dinners, or they come for a farm tour. They have no idea what is involved with farming, and it's a big playground for them. So again, when it comes to equipment, I strongly recommend that you put up keep out signs. If possible, put the equipment in an area well away from the area where the public is going to be. Again, customers shouldn't be permitted to access or operate equipment. And from a worker standpoint, make sure you have an adequate number of workers to oversee the number of guests you hope to attract. From a worker perspective, make sure they're aware of their responsibilities and that they're responsible for creating a safe environment. If you provide restrooms, make sure they're accessible and they're cleaned. That's especially important right now. I can't tell you, this year, COVID has done a lot of things and has crippled a lot of industries, but the agritourism industry, especially on-farm tours, UPIC operations have thrived. A lot of those operations have thrived during COVID because people are looking for something to do. Always have first aid kits with appropriate supplies. The last one is develop some type of emergency response plan, whether it be the employees know if something happens, call, I want you to call 911, or I want you to call a certain type of contact. If something does happen, the last thing you want to be worried about is people running around saying, well, I don't know what to do or who to call. Because if something in the event of an accident, the quicker that you can address it and get medical personnel on the premises, the better off everyone is going to be. Hopefully, all of you know a little bit about this sign. I think it was a wonderful statute. I believe it was enacted, I want to say 2007, 2008. Essentially what it says is that if you are a third party and you elect to participate in a particular agritourism activity, then you acknowledge that there's certain inherent risk associated with that particular activity. And as a result, you are assuming the risk of participating in that agritourism activity. I strongly recommend, and I was at a conference or a WebEx earlier this week with someone from Virginia Cooperative Extension, and I couldn't agree more with what this young lady said. She goes, we recommend that these be posted in parking areas. If you have a customer service area, that they be posted there. The one thing you need to realize is this is not 100% protection, because there are certain instances, even though this sign may be posted, where the agritourism professional can be held liable. And it's one of three, it can be three reasons. If that agritourism professional commits an act that is deemed to be negligent and disregards the safety of the participant or causes injury to that participant. If the agritourism professional knows of a condition on the property that is hazardous, whether it be the land or equipment or with animals, that professional can be held liable. Or if that professional intentionally injures a customer or a participant in an agritourism activity. I had a gentleman one time that was doing a hazard review. It was a pick your own operation. He had hay rides and things like that, and he contacted me to come out and take a walk around his premises to kind of make sure everything was safe. And we started talking about insurance. And I asked him about his insurance. He said, yeah, he says, I have cheap insurance. I said, oh, really? What type of insurance do you have? And he pointed to this sign and he said, that's my insurance. I kid you not. That's exactly what he told me. He said, that's my insurance. He said, the way that's worded, I'm protected. And the first question I asked him, I said, okay, I said, what are you going to do if you get sued? And you're going to have to defend yourself. Is that sign going to provide you with defense cost coverage? And after about, he processed that for about 5 seconds, and I saw this light bulb go off in his eyes, and he was like, I need an insurance policy, don't I? I said, yeah, yes, sir, you certainly do. So this is not cheap insurance, but the sign is, this is a very good statute. I don't think, and as of today, I checked before I came on tonight, as of today, this has not been challenged. So I don't know how it would hold up to unfortunately, I don't know how it would hold up if it were challenged in court, but to date, it has not been challenged. So stay tuned on that. To protect your operation, read your insurance policy. Invest the time to better understand your coverage. I know reading insurance policies, talking about insurance, I know it's not the most glamorous thing in the world, but if something happens, you're going to want to know. You're going to want to know, have that peace of mind to know, hey, I have the proper insurance coverage program in place. Meet with your agent at least annually to review your coverage. If you're an agritourism operator, things change on a dime. You're constantly thinking about, well, should I do this? Should I do that? Talk to your agent. As I said earlier, have your agent come out to your operation and walk around and make sure he or she understands what's going on. Again, make them aware of all activities that are taking place on the farm. Help them. As far as your insurance agent goes, your insurance agent can assist you in designing a program that's tailored to your particular operation. And there's an old saying out there that says, well, what they don't know can't hurt them. Well, in this particular case, if the agent, the insurance company is not aware of all the activities that are taking place, what they don't know can hurt you at the time of loss if that loss isn't covered. Some insurance companies should be able to help you in many ways, not just with coverage, not just with providing you with protection, but they have resources that can help you with liability assessments that are for your particular operation. I know my company, we have a staff of safety professionals who can come out and walk the property, walk the operation, and provide you with recommendations as to how to make it safer if they spot anything. They have checklists and general safety guidelines for various types of operations, and there are safety guidelines out there for specific activities and specific exposures. And the most important thing that I think you can do from an insurance perspective is work with your agent, partner with your agent to create a safe, not only create a safe operation, but also create an effective insurance program that is going to respond like you think it should if something unforeseen occurs. I'm going to open it up for questions. Here's my contact information. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have now or later on if you decide, hey, I wish I'd have thought about that during the time that we were together. Feel free to reach out to me. That you see my email, you see my phone number. I'd be more than happy to talk with you. As I said in the beginning, I'm passionate about agritourism operations, and as far as the state of Virginia goes, we have a vast amount of different activities taking place across the Commonwealth, and it seems to be growing day by day. So, Ashley, I'm going to turn it back over to you, and we'll see if anybody has any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was a really good presentation. Covered a whole lot of stuff. So if anybody's got any questions for Scott while he's here to answer them, now's your chance.
Can I ask the group something?
Go for it.
I'm assuming all of you are pumpkin growers and probably have U-pick operations. Are you involved in any other type of agritourism activities in conjunction with the U-pick operation?
know some of them are. Y'all can unmute if you want to, or you can type in the chat box too.
All right, since nobody else is doing it, I will say that we do haunts as well.
Okay.
And then Rachel in the chat has pick your own sunflowers.
Ooh, that's becoming very popular. That's kind of funny. I was in a meeting Tuesday with someone in Botetourt County who has pick your own sunflowers.
All right, she's got in here, other than a fence, what type of barricade would be sufficient to go around a pond?
That's a really good question because fencing can be expensive. A lot of times I've had people plant certain types of shrubs or greenery, you know, just to kind of keep, and they'll install like signs, like they'll put them on like a stake and it'll be a keep out sign or something along those lines. Fencing a pond, as I said, can be pretty, it can be pretty, it can be pretty costly. So I think if you can't barricade it with like a fence of some type, signs are probably the next best thing. And again, if you can create some kind of natural barrier with grasses, like tall grasses or shrubs or something like that, I think that can be effective as well.
Then we had another comment from somebody who's got a operation where they use a lot of games, bounce houses, playground equipment, stuff like that.
Yeah, those you got to be careful with, but because those are one of the in some cases, and again we talked about in Virginia not being a strict liability state, but in some states, any type of bounce house, any type of like trampoline or jump, something like that, it's one of those strict liability things. Again, if you have that, one of the things I strongly recommend, and you probably know more about it than I do if you're operating, just make sure that you have some type of plan in place where you're monitoring the weather fairly often, because if a windstorm or thunderstorm comes up, we've all seen those YouTube videos where you see the bounce house I'm just kind of rolling over and over again. So I would say definitely have some kind of have some, if you have that type of operation, have some type of weather radio, have some type of alert system that you can monitor to make sure that a sudden storm doesn't come up and you don't have people in it and all of a sudden they're taking a ride that they didn't necessarily sign up for.
All right, are there any other questions or comments for Scott? Anything else you want to ask them too?
Yeah, I see here in the chat that someone said about a waiver, and a waiver is very good, but it's not going. Unfortunately, it's not going to keep someone from suing you. It may, as far as what it may do, if someone gets hurt, they may say, well, I signed that waiver, so I can't do anything about it. But legally, if they still want to sue you, they can. I'm not saying that waivers aren't good. I think waivers are a very good risk management tool. Just know that they aren't foolproof.
We may get some other questions from people who watch the recording too. So your contact info is still up. And then of course, if you wanted to
Sure.
route anything through me, the association, your local.
Sure. And
Bureau.
again, if you have questions going forward, you've got my contact information. I'll be happy I'll be happy to help.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate, and I know everybody else really appreciates your time tonight. This was really great, and really glad that everybody was able to get on. And I do want to point out next Tuesday, we'll be back with our talk on insect control and pollinators. So be sure to join in for that too. But again, thank you so much, Scott. And
Thank you. I
you have
enjoyed it.
yeah. So have
I
a
enjoyed it.
wonderful
I really
evening,
did.
everybody.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.